Ever wondered why some sentences sound more formal, or even mysterious, than others? One of the key tricks in English grammar is the use of active and passive voice. These two structures can completely change the way information is presented, often making it sound more professional, objective, or even suspenseful. Whether you're writing a report, telling a story, or crafting a compelling argument, knowing when to switch between active and passive voice can give you a powerful edge. In this video, we'll dive deep into what active and passive voice really mean, how they work, and when to use each one for maximum effect. In English, we can write sentences in two main ways: active voice and passive voice. These two forms are used to focus on different parts of the sentence. In active voice, the subject of the sentence does the action. In passive voice, the action is done to the subject. Learning both voices helps you write and speak more clearly. Let's understand how each one works and when to use them. Active voice is the most direct and natural way of speaking or writing in English. It puts focus on the person or thing doing the action. For example, the cat chased the mouse. In this sentence, the subject is the cat, and it is doing the action of chasing. This makes the sentence clear and easy to follow. Most of the time, we use active voice in everyday speech and writing. Passive voice is used when the focus is on the action or the object receiving the action. For example, the mouse was chased by the cat. Here, the focus is more on the mouse and what happened to it. Sometimes we don't know who did the action, and sometimes it's not important. For example, the window was broken. We don't know who broke it, and that might not matter. To change a sentence from active to passive, we need to change the structure. The object of the active sentence becomes the subject of the passive one. Then we use the verb to be in the correct tense, followed by the past participle of the main verb. For example, she writes a letter becomes a letter is written by her. This structure is used in formal writing, reports, or when the doer is unknown. Here is another example: they built the bridge in 2010. This is in active voice. To make it passive, say, the bridge was built in 2010. Notice how we focus on the bridge, not who built it. Sometimes we do not need to say, by them, or by someone. If it's clear or not important, we can leave out the doer. Let's look at the tense changes more closely. In the present simple tense, active voice like he cleans the room becomes the room is cleaned. In past simple, he cleaned the room changes to the room was cleaned. Always remember to use the right form of to be depending on the tense. Then use the past participle of the main verb. This is how passive voice is formed. In present continuous, she is painting the house becomes the house is being painted. The phrase is being shows it is happening now. In past continuous, they were watching a movie becomes a movie was being watched. In future tense, she will bake a cake becomes a cake will be baked. Notice how the verb forms change to match the tense. For perfect tenses, the changes are also clear. He has written a book becomes a book has been written. In the past perfect, she had cooked dinner turns into dinner had been cooked. In future perfect, they will have finished the work becomes the work will have been finished. The helping verb been always stays with perfect tenses in passive voice. Let's look at modal verbs in passive voice. Take a sentence like you should wash the car. The passive form is the car should be washed. Another example is he must complete the project, which becomes the project must be completed. With modal verbs like can, must, should, may, we use the pattern, modal be past participle. Sometimes we use passive voice to sound politer or formal. For example, instead of saying you made a mistake, we can say a mistake was made. This avoids directly blaming someone. In academic writing or reports, passive voice is often preferred. It sounds more neutral and objective, especially in scientific or technical writing. Let's compare more examples to see the difference. The teacher explained the lesson is active. The lesson was explained by the teacher is passive. The police arrested the thief is active. The thief was arrested by the police is passive. You can see that the focus shifts from who did the action to what happened to the object. Sometimes the passive voice sounds awkward or wordy, especially in casual speech. For example, the cake was eaten by the dog is correct but feels heavier than the dog ate the cake. That's why active voice is usually better for everyday talking. Use passive voice only when necessary or when the subject isn't known or important. Let's practice a few sentences. Change he opens the door into passive, the door is opened. Now take she is writing a poem and change it, a poem is being written. Try they have painted the wall into passive, the wall has been painted. Practicing like this helps you remember the structure more easily. In passive voice, sometimes we do not include the person who did the action. If it is obvious or not needed, we leave it out. For example, the homework was done is fine on its own. If we say the homework was done by the student, it adds detail, but it's not always necessary. In many cases, the passive voice just tells what happened, not who did it. Let's go through different tenses again with examples in both voices. Present simple, she reads books. Books are read. Past simple, he drove the car. The car was driven. Present continuous, they are building a house. A house is being built. Past continuous, she was watching a movie. A movie was being watched. Future simple, we will start the project. The project will be started. Future perfect, they will have fixed the roof. The roof will have been fixed. Present perfect, he has written many letters. Many letters have been written. Past perfect, she had cleaned the room. The room had been cleaned. Now let's look at some negative sentences. In active, he does not clean the kitchen. Passive, the kitchen is not cleaned. In past tense, they did not finish the job. Passive, the job was not finished. Notice how we keep the helping verb not in the correct position. This makes the sentence negative while staying grammatically correct. Questions in passive voice also follow a special structure. In active, did she complete the report? Passive, was the report completed? Another one, is he writing a letter? Passive, is a letter being written? In each case, move the verb to be before the subject, and use the past participle. These patterns take time but become easy with practice. Let's try some more questions. Active, have they cleaned the floor? Passive, has the floor been cleaned? Active, will she sing the song? Passive, will the song be sung? When you form questions in the passive voice, focus on correct word order and verb tense. It can be tricky at first but gets easier over time. Some verbs cannot be used in passive voice. These are usually intransitive verbs, verbs that do not take an object. For example, go, arrive, sleep, or exist. You can say he sleeps but not he is slept. Since there's no object to become the subject in passive, these verbs do not work in passive sentences. Also, some passive sentences sound strange or confusing if used in the wrong context. For example, mistakes were made by me sounds odd. It's clearer to say I made mistakes. So, passive voice is not always the best choice. Use it only when it fits the message or tone you want to express. Active voice is usually stronger and more direct. There are special passive structures too. For example, it is said that, or he is known to. These are called impersonal passive constructions. For example, people say she is talented because it is said that she is talented. Or she is known to sing beautifully. These are used often in news, reports, or formal speech. Let's try some impersonal passive examples. People believe he is honest. It is believed that he is honest. Another one, everyone knows she works hard. She is known to work hard. These patterns allow you to express ideas without clearly stating who believes or knows them, which adds a neutral and formal tone. Passive voice is also used in instructions or announcements. For example, visitors are not allowed beyond this point. Or the form must be signed before submission. These are common in signs, manuals, or rules. The passive tone sounds more official and removes the focus from who is doing the action. In storytelling or news, passive voice can add drama or mystery. For example, the painting was stolen last night. The sentence focuses on what happened, not who did it. In mystery books, you often see passive sentences to create suspense. The door was left open. Nothing was found. This style makes the reader curious. Finally, let's look at tips for mastering active and passive voice. First, always identify the subject, verb, and object. Second, practice changing sentences from one voice to the other. Third, pay attention to tense and verb forms. Fourth, read and listen to examples in books and media. And fifth, write your own sentences to build confidence. So now you've learned what active and passive voice are, how to form them, when to use them, and how they change in different tenses. You've seen examples, tried transformations, and explored special cases. Keep practicing regularly to remember the rules. With time, using both voices will become natural for you. Let's now look at sentences with two objects, which are common in passive voice. Take this example, she gave him a gift. This has two objects, him, indirect object, and a gift, direct object. We can make two passive sentences. He was given a gift or a gift was given to him. Both are correct. The choice depends on what you want to emphasize. Using the correct form of the verb is still important when dealing with two objects. For example, they sent her an invitation can become she was sent an invitation or an invitation was sent to her. In both cases, use the past participle of send, which is sent. Choosing which passive form to use depends on clarity and importance of the object. Sometimes, passive voice can be used to sound more diplomatic or less harsh. For instance, Instead of saying you made a mistake, which can sound blaming, you might say a mistake was made. This is useful in business emails or official messages. It softens the tone and focuses on the situation rather than the person. That's a powerful use of passive voice. In literature or creative writing, passive voice can be used to create rhythm or vary sentence style. For example, the door creaked open. A shadow was seen moving across the floor. These passive sentences can help set a mysterious or distant mood. Writers use them on purpose for stylistic effect. So passive voice isn't always bad, it just depends on how it's used. Passive voice is also useful in scientific and academic writing. In lab reports or research papers, it's often more important to focus on the action or result than on the person doing it. For example, the solution was heated to 100 degrees Celsius. This tells the reader what happened without saying who did it. It makes the writing sound formal and objective. Another important use of passive voice is in legal or official documents. For example, the contract was signed on April 3rd or the defendant was found guilty. These sentences are clear, formal, and remove personal bias. Passive voice in legal writing focuses on the action or outcome. It's a standard style in rules, laws, and procedures. Let's now look at how to spot passive voice quickly. If a sentence has a form of to be followed by a past participle, and possibly followed by someone, it's passive. For example, the cake was baked by Anna. The verb was baked is the clue. Not all sentences with was are passive, but when it's followed by a past participle, it usually is. It's also useful to check if the sentence has a clear subject doing the action. In active voice, the subject is obvious. In passive voice, the subject might be missing or appear after by. For example, in the letter was mailed, we don't know who mailed it. In John mailed the letter, the subject, John, is doing the action, so it's active. A good exercise is to take a paragraph and rewrite it in passive voice. For example, the chef prepared the meal. He served it with care. Everyone enjoyed the food. Now in passive, the meal was prepared by the chef. It was served with care. The food was enjoyed by everyone. This helps you practice thinking in both voices. Another way to practice is by writing news headlines or short reports. Start with active voice. Police arrested 3 suspects. Now change to passive. 3 suspects were arrested. These are common in newspapers or reports. Passive voice helps create a neutral, informative tone. Practicing with headlines builds strong sentence control. Sometimes, passive voice helps avoid awkward or long subjects. For example, instead of saying someone in the group who was not identified took the laptop, you can say the laptop was taken. This avoids the need for a long or unclear subject. It helps you be more concise. In formal writing, this is often preferred for clarity. Passive voice is also useful when you want to keep information secret. For example, mistakes were made doesn't say who made them. Or the decision was made doesn't tell who made it. This vagueness can be helpful in politics or diplomacy. It avoids pointing fingers. But it can also hide responsibility, so use it wisely. Let's now explore a few more examples with modal verbs in passive form. You can watch the movie becomes the movie can be watched. He might win the prize becomes the prize might be won. Modal verbs like can, may, might, must, should, would, could all follow the pattern, modal be past participle. It's simple once you remember the rule. There are also passive infinitives. For example, I want to be heard. Here, to be heard is the passive infinitive. Another example is the book needs to be read. This is often used with verbs like need, want, expect, hope, and prefer. In these cases, to be past participle expresses something that should or must happen. Another useful form is the get passive. Instead of the window was broken, you can say the window got broken. This form is informal and more common in speech than writing. It can also suggest surprise or accident. For example, he got hurt at work sounds more casual than he was hurt at work. Both are correct but have different tones. Let's look at one more kind of passive, causative passive. These are sentences like I had my car washed or she got her hair cut. In these, someone causes someone else to do the action. You're not doing it yourself, but you're arranging for it to be done. It's not exactly the same as normal passive voice, but it follows a similar structure. Practicing passive voice regularly helps you become more comfortable switching between styles. You can read English newspapers, underline all passive sentences, and rewrite them in active voice. Or take an active text from a novel and change it to passive. It's a great way to train your brain and become more flexible with grammar. You can also play grammar games or use flashcards to practice verb forms and sentence structures. Make 2 stacks, one with subjects, one with verbs. Try to form both active and passive versions. For example, draw the teacher and explain. Active, the teacher explains the topic. Passive, the topic is explained by the teacher. Another fun idea is using role play. One person says an active sentence, and the other changes it to passive, or vice versa. Example, the mechanic fixed the car. Partner replies, the car was fixed by the mechanic. This kind of real-time practice improves your reaction speed and helps with speaking naturally. You can also watch videos or listen to podcasts and write down sentences you hear in passive voice. Pause the audio, write the sentence, and then change it to active. It works best with news, documentaries, or formal talks, since they often use passive voice. This builds listening and grammar skills at the same time. To summarize, passive voice is a powerful part of English grammar. It helps you shift focus, avoid repetition, and write more formally or politely. When used well, it improves your writing. But when overused, it can make sentences vague or dull. Learning when and how to use passive voice is the key to mastering it. You now understand basic and advanced uses of passive voice. You've practiced with different tenses, modals, questions, negatives, and more. You've also learned how to use it in real life, news, reports, formal writing, and everyday speech. Keep reviewing, practicing, and playing with sentence structures. That's how you become fluent and flexible in English. Another interesting area is how passive voice interacts with phrasal verbs. A phrasal verb is made of a verb and a particle like on, up, or off. In passive voice, the particle usually stays with the verb. For example, they called off the meeting becomes the meeting was called off. It's important to keep the particle in the right place. Moving it can confuse the meaning. Phrasal verbs are very common in English, and learning how to make them passive helps a lot. For example, they turned down the offer becomes the offer was turned down. Someone has filled out the form changes to the form has been filled out. Practice makes it easier to know which phrasal verbs can be used passively and which cannot. In English, some verbs are rarely or never used in the passive voice. These include state verbs like belong, resemble, own, and fit. You don't say the shirt is belong to me. That's incorrect. These verbs describe conditions or relationships, not actions, so they don't fit into passive constructions naturally. It's best to keep them in active voice. Sometimes, passive voice is used in poetry or song lyrics to create mood or rhythm. For example, a line like her name was whispered in the wind sounds more poetic than someone whispered her name in the wind. The passive voice adds softness, distance, or even mystery. Writers and songwriters often use it to set a tone or stir emotion. Let's also look at how passive voice is used in advertising and branding. Companies often use it to focus on the experience rather than the doer. For example, your car is serviced with care or every detail is checked. These phrases make the service feel thoughtful and professional. Passive voice helps center the attention on the customer and results. In history books or biographies, passive voice often appears when the writer wants to focus on what happened rather than who caused it. The war was declared in 1914. This puts the focus on the event itself. In some cases, the writer might not even know who did the action, so passive voice is the best choice to keep things accurate but neutral. In news reporting, passive voice is commonly used to delay naming the subject or to keep the report objective. For example, shots were fired in the early hours of the morning. This sentence tells us what happened without saying who fired the shots. Later, once more facts are known, the subject may be added. This style keeps the tone factual and cautious. It's also helpful to know that in some languages, passive voice is rarely used or formed differently. So, if English isn't your first language, the concept of passive voice might feel strange. But once you understand how the subject and object switch places, and how verb forms change, it becomes easier to recognize and use correctly. Passive constructions can also be long and complex in advanced writing. For example, the new system has been thoroughly tested and carefully reviewed by a panel of international experts. This type of sentence is common in academic or technical writing. It provides detailed information while keeping the focus on the process or results, not the people involved. In spoken English, passive voice can sometimes sound too formal or distant. That's why, in casual conversations, people prefer the active voice. For instance, "They fixed my car" is more common than "my car was fixed." Still, passive voice appears in everyday speech when we don't know who did something, like "my phone was stolen last night." English learners sometimes confuse passive voice with past tense because both can use was or were. But the key difference is the use of the past participle. "He was tired" is not passive, it's just past tense with an adjective. "He was helped" is passive because helped is a past participle and it describes an action done to the subject. It's helpful to make a habit of checking your writing for overuse of passive voice. You can read your sentences and ask, who is doing the action? If it's unclear or missing, and that's not your goal, try rewriting in active voice. For example, the document was reviewed could become the manager reviewed the document, which sounds stronger. Some writing tools and grammar checkers even highlight passive sentences so you can choose whether to change them. This is useful when editing essays, reports, or emails. It's not that passive voice is wrong, but using it too often can make writing feel weak or unclear. Balance is key, mix both voices for better style and flow. Let's think about how passive voice is used in storytelling from the point of view of characters. If a character is feeling powerless or distant from events, passive voice can reflect that emotion. For example, everything was taken from him shows helplessness. Writers use this technique to match the grammar with the emotional state of a character. Passive voice can also make instructions sound more general and impersonal. Compare you must wear a helmet with helmets must be worn. The second version is more formal and less direct. That's why passive voice is common in safety rules, user manuals, and regulations. It focuses on the action, not on who should do it. Sometimes you'll hear a mix of active and passive structures in one sentence. For example, while the house was being cleaned, the children played outside. This creates a clear picture with two actions happening at once. Using different voices in the same sentence allows for variation and more detailed storytelling or description. Another passive form includes using have with been and the past participle. For example, the house has been sold. This is present perfect passive. It tells us the action is completed but still important now. Similarly, the work had been finished before the deadline is past perfect passive. These forms are helpful in reports and summaries, sometimes. We use passive voice to avoid sounding too direct or forceful. For instance, in customer service, your order has been delayed sounds politer than we delayed your order. It removes the focus from blame and keeps the tone calm. Passive voice is often used this way in apologies, updates, and sensitive situations. In film and TV scripts, passive voice is used to shift attention to the action. For example, the building was surrounded by police instantly paints a picture of the scene. There's no need to say police officers surrounded the building. Passive voice lets the reader focus on the event rather than the people doing it. Even in jokes or sarcastic comments, passive voice can be useful. For example, mistakes were made, but not by me. This sentence avoids taking blame and sounds humorous. The grammar stays correct, but the tone depends on how it's said. That's another way passive voice allows for creative or indirect expression in speech. When reading or writing fiction, notice how authors choose between active and passive depending on pace and tension. Active voice keeps things moving fast. He slammed the door. Passive slows it down. The door was slammed shut. This balance helps guide the reader's experience. Passive voice adds weight and detail when needed. Lastly, learning to use both voices is a sign of strong grammar and writing skill. Some tests and exams even include tasks where you must convert active to passive or vice versa. Being able to switch easily shows a deep understanding of sentence structure and verb use. Practice will make this process automatic over time, when working with reported speech. Passive voice sometimes plays a role. For example, people say that he is a genius can be rewritten as he is said to be a genius. This form is common in journalism or formal writing. Another example is it is believed that the painting is valuable. These phrases let the writer report ideas without naming a specific person. This special use of passive is helpful when expressing common beliefs, rumors, or general knowledge. The actor is thought to live in Paris is another example. It sounds distant and neutral, which is useful in news articles or polite conversation. It helps avoid pointing to a specific source. That's why it appears in serious or official writing. Passive voice can also work in conditional sentences, especially when talking about hypothetical or formal situations. For example, if the law is broken, there will be consequences. Another version, if help is needed, press this button. These forms keep the focus on the condition or event itself, not the person involved. It's a calm, instructive tone. There's also a difference between using being and been in passive structures. Being is used in continuous tenses, like the room is being cleaned. This tells us the action is happening now. Been is used in perfect tenses, like the room has been cleaned, which means the action is finished. These details help express time clearly. Sometimes passive voice is useful in summaries, like in academic or business writing. For example, 3 methods were tested. Only one was successful. These short passive statements focus on the results. They keep the report neat and objective. Writers often use passive to emphasize findings over people in research or project summaries. Passive voice can appear in questions, which sometimes sound more polite or formal. For example, has the report been finished? Or was the package delivered? These questions focus on the result. Compare with the active form, did you finish the report? Or did he deliver the package? The passive version sounds more official and less direct. In everyday situations, people use passive voice to sound less confrontational. For example, instead of saying you broke the glass, someone might say, the glass was broken. This shifts attention away from blame. It helps keep conversations calm and polite, especially when discussing accidents or problems. You might also hear passive voice in announcements or automated messages. For example, your call is being transferred, or the doors will be opened shortly. These messages are neutral and do not mention who is taking the action. It sounds professional and suits the style of customer service or public communication. In some languages, passive voice looks very different, so English learners may need time to adjust. In English, we form passive by using a form of be and the past participle. But in some languages, a prefix, suffix, or word change may express passive. This difference can cause confusion, so practicing sentence structure is important. Passive voice can help hide information when needed. For example, in mystery stories, the jewels were stolen during the night gives readers the fact but not the criminal. This keeps suspense alive. Writers often use this to withhold key details and build tension until the right moment in the story. When used carefully, passive voice can help a sentence flow better, especially when linking ideas. Take this pair, the project was delayed. As a result, the deadline was missed. Both are passive, and they keep the focus on the chain of events. If written actively, it might distract with too many subjects doing actions. In resumes or CVs, people often use passive to keep the focus on results. For example, several new systems were implemented or a 20% increase in sales was achieved. It makes the statements sound formal and professional. Passive voice works well in such documents to highlight achievements without always using I or we. You can also use passive voice to avoid repetition in writing. Imagine you have said the staff cleaned the rooms. The staff prepared the meals. Rewriting as the rooms were cleaned. The meals were prepared removes the repeated subject. It keeps the writing smoother and more elegant without sounding dull. Passive voice is sometimes preferred in academic writing because it removes personal bias. For example, the hypothesis was tested under various conditions. Avoid saying who tested it. This keeps the focus on the process and makes the writing feel more scientific. Active voice is not wrong, but passive is often chosen for this purpose. In official letters or workplace communication, passive can soften commands. Instead of saying submit the report by Friday, one might write the report should be submitted by Friday. This version is less harsh and more respectful. It's a common technique in professional emails and formal instructions. You can also use passive voice when giving descriptions of objects or places. For example, the walls are painted white or the windows were designed to face the garden. This helps describe the appearance or design of something without mentioning the designer or painter. It focuses on what is seen or experienced. Children's books sometimes use passive voice to describe events clearly. For example, the toys were taken out of the box, or the story was read before bedtime. These sentences sound gentle and clear. Passive voice is helpful when the reader is still learning and doesn't need too many subjects in every sentence. Passive voice also appears in job instructions or service procedures. For example, the machine must be turned off before cleaning. It gives clear steps without naming the person. That way, the instruction applies to everyone. It's direct and universal, which is important in training manuals and workplace guides. Even in cooking instructions, passive voice is common. The onions are chopped, the sauce is stirred, or the dish is served hot. These phrases give focus to the steps and ingredients. Passive voice here helps the reader concentrate on the action rather than who is doing it. Since the cook is always the reader, you'll also find passive voice in environmental or social reports. Forests are being cut down or laws have been passed to protect wildlife. These sentences tell what is happening, often without saying who is responsible. It gives an overview of the situation and lets readers focus on the issue, not just the people behind it. In advertising slogans, passive voice can make products sound luxurious or well-made. For example, crafted with care or designed for comfort. These short phrases don't say who made the item, but they sound smooth and appealing. Passive voice gives them a professional, polished tone that works well in branding. Finally, when learning English, mastering passive voice helps you understand a wider range of texts. From books and articles to instructions and reports, passive voice appears everywhere. Knowing how to recognize it and use it makes your English more flexible and advanced. It opens the door to better writing and deeper understanding. In formal debates or speeches, passive voice can help keep the language neutral. For example, someone might say, mistakes were made during the process, instead of naming who made the mistakes. This allows the speaker to focus on moving forward instead of assigning blame. It also sounds more polished and less emotional, which suits professional situations. Passive voice here acts like a shield, helping the speaker stay calm and controlled. Another useful aspect of passive voice is how it helps create a sense of process or system. Sentences like applications are reviewed monthly or orders are shipped within 48 hours show that something happens regularly. This is common in business communication. It tells the reader what happens without focusing on individual workers. It creates a sense of order, consistency, and reliability in how things are done. In science fiction or fantasy writing, passive voice is often used to build mystery or suspense. A sentence like "the portal was opened" leaves the reader wondering who opened it. This helps create an eerie or magical tone. It also lets the writer slowly reveal details over time, which is perfect for building tension. Passive voice adds atmosphere when the speaker doesn't want to give away everything at once. You'll also notice passive voice in instructions where the person taking action is assumed. For example, the lid should be closed tightly after use. This is often seen on packaging, warning labels, or directions. It makes the instruction apply to anyone without saying you directly. This keeps things formal and avoids sounding too personal or bossy. It's a subtle but useful way to guide people clearly. Another interesting use of passive voice is in diplomacy or politics. Politicians often use it to avoid directly blaming someone. For example, mistakes were made during the negotiation. Avoid saying who made them. It sounds vague on purpose, allowing the speaker to stay neutral. It's often used to calm down tense situations or avoid public backlash. This kind of careful language depends heavily on the passive voice. When translating from other languages into English, sometimes passive voice is necessary to keep the original meaning. This happens especially when the source language avoids naming the subject. For example, es word beschlossen in German becomes "it was decided" in English. The passive form helps express a shared or unknown decision. Knowing how to use this in English helps translators stay accurate and natural. In education, teachers might use passive voice to focus on learning goals. They might say, "the topic will be introduced tomorrow," rather than "I will introduce the topic tomorrow." This makes the lesson seem like a shared process rather than a personal act. It helps create a calm and equal tone in the classroom. Passive voice plays a part in making instructions sound open and supportive. In crime or accident reports, passive voice is often used to describe events carefully. For example, "the suspect was arrested" or "no injuries were reported." These kinds of statements keep the focus on what happened, not on opinions. It also avoids suggesting guilt too early. This is important in legal or official writing where accuracy and fairness are necessary. In psychological writing, passive voice can reflect feelings of being acted upon or overwhelmed. For example, "she was ignored by everyone" or "he was controlled by fear." These sentences suggest a lack of control, which is often the point. Passive voice helps the writer show emotional states more clearly. It mirrors how the character or subject feels inside. Passive voice can also be found in weather reports and forecasts. Sentences like "rain is expected tomorrow" or "high winds were recorded overnight" are typical. These forms focus on the event, not the person reporting it. They give facts without extra information, which makes them easy to understand. It's a standard style used in news, alerts, and public safety updates. Even in sports commentary, passive voice appears from time to time. For example, a foul was committed or the goal was scored in the final minute. These statements highlight the moment instead of the player. This can help the commentator stay neutral or avoid judgment. It also lets the audience focus on what's important in that moment, the action itself. Some passive forms begin with the phrase "it is," followed by a past participle. For example, it is believed that the team will win, or it is said that she's the best singer. These are known as impersonal passive constructions. They're used to express opinions, rumors, or widely accepted ideas without saying who believes or says them. They are polite and formal. In business emails, passive voice often sounds more diplomatic. For instance, "the issue has been resolved" sounds smoother than "we resolved the issue." It removes focus from the company or the sender and puts attention on the outcome. It's a great way to stay professional and clear, especially when discussing problems or solutions with customers or clients. When studying literature, noticing passive voice can help reveal tone or character. A sentence like "the truth was hidden for years" can show secrecy or injustice. It tells us something happened, but not who made it happen. Writers use this style to highlight important events while leaving details in the dark. It adds mystery and invites deeper thought from the reader. Passive voice sometimes uses the verb get instead of be, especially in informal speech. For example, "he got fired last week" or "she got promoted." These are still passive constructions, but they sound more casual. They're common in conversations or informal writing. While not always proper in academic texts, this form is natural and widely used in daily English. If you're trying to sound humble or modest, passive voice helps avoid sounding like you're bragging. Instead of saying, "I wrote 3 books," you might say, "3 books were written." This keeps the focus on the result, not on yourself. It's often used in interviews, presentations, or when giving credit to a group instead of an individual. In some cases, passive voice allows speakers to distance themselves from a statement. For example, "it was decided that changes were needed." This doesn't tell us who decided, which may be intentional. It keeps things vague, which is useful when dealing with sensitive topics. That kind of distance helps avoid conflict or disagreement. Passive voice can also show respect, especially when talking about serious or emotional topics. Saying "he was laid to rest yesterday" sounds more gentle than "they buried him yesterday." It adds a respectful tone to the sentence. This form often appears in obituaries, memorials, or speeches about loss and remembrance. In creative writing, passive voice can slow down the pacing of a scene on purpose. If a writer wants to create a pause or build tension, they might say, "the key was turned slowly in the lock." It draws attention to the moment itself, not just the person doing it. This slows things down, lets the reader visualize the action, and creates suspense. It can be used effectively when the writer wants to highlight mood or setting. Writers sometimes use passive voice to shift blame or create unreliable narrators. For example, a character might say, "mistakes were made," without taking personal responsibility. This can reveal something about their personality. Perhaps they're trying to hide guilt. Readers may notice the lack of accountability and grow suspicious. Passive voice becomes a storytelling device, giving depth to character behavior. In historical writing, passive voice helps describe events without judging them. A sentence like "the city was captured in 1846" tells us what happened but avoids saying who was right or wrong. This neutral tone is useful when writing about sensitive or disputed topics. It keeps the facts front and center. Passive voice supports fairness in presenting complex or painful histories. Sometimes passive voice is needed because the subject is unknown or unimportant. For example, "the wallet was stolen" works even if we don't know who did it. This is useful in daily conversation when the action matters more than the person. It allows speakers to focus on the result or outcome, especially when they lack all the details. This makes passive voice very practical and versatile in real life. In poetry, passive voice can create a softer or more distant feeling. For instance, "her name was whispered in the dark" feels more dreamlike than the active form. It gives the line a gentle rhythm and emotional depth. Poets use this form to suggest mystery, memory, or reflection. Passive constructions can blend easily with other poetic tools like repetition or metaphor. In detective fiction, passive voice is often used in witness statements. A person might say, "the door was already open when I arrived." This kind of language removes strong claims and sticks to observations. It reflects how people speak when they're unsure or afraid of saying too much. Passive voice lets writers create tension by limiting clear facts and hiding motives. Writers also use passive voice when they want to highlight damage or harm. For example, "the village was destroyed overnight" makes the destruction the focus. The agent of the action might not matter, or the speaker might want to avoid saying it. This kind of phrasing can add drama or tragedy to a scene. It helps frame a situation from the point of view of the result, not the attacker. In comedy, passive voice can be used for irony or exaggeration. Imagine a line like "a mistake was made, but no one will admit it." This has a funny tone because it sounds overly formal for a simple problem. Writers use this style to mock official language or to make everyday events sound grand. The mismatch between tone and topic can create humor. In storytelling, passive voice sometimes helps describe background events that aren't the main focus. For example, "the windows were cleaned earlier that morning" might set a scene without distracting from the main action. It adds context without requiring new characters. This helps writers control pacing and focus. It's a way to build a fuller world without cluttering the narrative. Passive voice also appears in formal ceremonies or traditions. For instance, guests are welcomed with a speech sounds more ceremonial than the active version. It feels timeless and traditional, which suits formal events. Using this voice in such contexts adds to the dignity and formality. It supports the respectful tone of the moment. Sometimes advertisements use passive voice to sound smooth and effortless. For example, "no harsh chemicals are used" or "all meals are freshly prepared." This makes the product seem clean, natural, or safe without pointing to a specific worker or process. It helps create trust. Passive voice supports the message that everything is taken care of for the customer. In group activities or shared projects, passive voice helps include everyone without pointing fingers. A sentence like "the plan was discussed thoroughly" makes it sound like a team effort. It avoids naming just one speaker. This helps encourage collaboration and equality. Passive voice plays a subtle role in creating a sense of shared responsibility. Writers use passive voice when they want to give the impression that something is common knowledge. For instance, it is widely accepted that exercise improves health gives the statement more authority. It implies agreement among experts without naming any. This form helps writers sound knowledgeable or persuasive without getting too technical or detailed. In product instructions, passive voice can keep things simple and easy to follow. For example, the battery is inserted here or the device should be charged overnight. This keeps focus on the user's task. It prevents distraction by not naming people or companies. It's a clean and consistent way to give instructions that anyone can understand. Even in casual conversation, passive voice pops up naturally. Someone might say, "The cake was already eaten," instead of blaming someone directly. It adds a playful or surprised tone. People often choose this form to keep things lighthearted or avoid drama. It's a flexible tool in everyday language for managing tone and emotion. Passive voice can also show a passage of time or change in condition. For instance, the paint had faded by the time we returned quietly tells us something changed. This use helps create mood, especially in stories or reflections. It allows description without jumping to action. It helps the reader feel the setting without being rushed. Writers often balance active and passive voice for rhythm. Too much passive voice can sound dull, while too little can feel too sharp or aggressive. By mixing the two, sentences feel more natural. For example, he lit the candles. The room was filled with light. The first sentence is active, the second passive, and together they flow smoothly. In some genres of writing, like dystopian fiction, passive voice is used to make events feel out of control or dictated by external forces. For example, the laws were enforced strictly gives a sense of a powerful, unseen authority controlling the situation. This creates an atmosphere of oppression or fear. By not specifying who enforces the laws, the focus is placed on the impersonal system or government, which deepens the sense of helplessness. Another interesting use of passive voice is when describing everyday actions that don't require much attention to the person performing them. For instance, the trash was taken out last night or the dishes were washed this morning. In these cases, the focus is on the task being completed rather than on who did it. It's a way of keeping conversation smooth and avoiding unnecessary detail when the action is routine. In academic and research writing, the passive voice is particularly common in the methodology section. A researcher might write, "The data were analyzed using statistical software," which keeps the focus on the process, not the person conducting it. This objective tone removes subjectivity, making the research seem impartial and grounded in facts. This allows the researcher to emphasize the importance of the results over the person who gathered them. When writing product descriptions, passive voice often appears to create a more refined, objective tone. For instance, "This product is crafted with care," or "the materials are sourced from trusted suppliers." Here, passive voice helps make the product seem more high-end, without sounding like a direct sales pitch. It conveys quality and attention to detail without drawing attention to who is responsible for creating the product. In historical fiction, authors often use passive voice to convey events that have already happened and are largely beyond anyone's control. For example, the castle was besieged for weeks or the town was abandoned when the invaders arrived. This creates a sense of inevitability and emphasizes that the characters are swept up in forces beyond their power. Passive voice here helps to establish a historical distance between the characters and the events happening around them. Passive voice can sometimes help avoid unnecessary repetition of a subject in long paragraphs or when narrating extended actions. Consider, the plans were made, the papers were signed, and the decisions were final. The use of passive voice keeps the sentences clean without having to repeat who made or signed the plans. It allows the story to flow smoothly without cluttering it with too many actors. In formal reports, passive constructions allow the writer to keep the tone impersonal and objective. For example, it has been confirmed that the package was delivered on time avoids the need to specify who confirmed it. This focuses the reader's attention on the confirmation itself rather than the person or organization confirming it. In situations where the subject is irrelevant, passive voice can keep communication clear and professional. Passive voice also plays an important role in writing laws or regulations. For example, fines will be imposed for late submissions sounds neutral and official, without naming any specific authority enforcing the law. This gives the law a sense of universality and clarity, without appearing to single out individuals or institutions. It creates a legal tone, where the focus is on the regulation itself rather than the people behind it. Sometimes, passive voice is used to make a situation seem less direct or harsh. If a manager says, "The report was not submitted on time," it softens the impact compared to saying, "You didn't submit the report on time." This form reduces confrontation and places the emphasis on the event rather than the individual's mistake. It's a diplomatic way to address a problem without sounding accusatory. In some cultural or social contexts, passive voice can be used to downplay responsibility. For instance, the decision was made to delay the event keeps the speaker from naming who made the decision, which may avoid the need for justification or explanation. This can be useful in situations where the speaker wants to keep their language neutral and avoid controversy. It shifts the focus from individuals to the decision itself. When writing instructions or directions, passive voice often removes the need for the writer to take personal responsibility. For example, the form must be completed in full sounds less personal than saying, "You must complete the form in full." This creates a more general, formal tone, and it doesn't single out any individual. The focus stays on the task itself, making the instructions clear and impersonal. In philosophy or abstract discussions, passive voice allows for more general statements that are not tied to specific actions or people. For example, it is known that the mind shapes perception avoids referring to who knows or discovered this fact. This creates a sense of universality and allows the focus to remain on the idea itself, which is crucial in discussions where specific details are secondary to the overall concept. When discussing future events in a formal context, passive voice can make the statement sound more official and less personal. For example, "The project will be completed next month" sounds more neutral than "We will complete the project next month." This avoids directly identifying the responsible party, making the statement seem more like an inevitability than a personal action. It's often used in business reports or corporate statements. In everyday life, passive voice can help convey actions in a more laid-back, unbothered way. For instance, "The movie was watched last night" or "The groceries were brought home." In these examples, there's no need to identify who took the action. It makes the statement sound more casual and conversational, while still keeping the message clear. This helps people talk about activities without over-explaining or focusing on themselves. Passive voice is also useful when focusing on something that has been completed or achieved. For example, the task has been completed emphasizes the result rather than the effort. In business or team environments, this form can be used to communicate that goals have been met, shifting attention from the doers to the accomplishments. It's a professional way to describe progress without pinpointing individual efforts. In fiction, passive voice can suggest a sense of helplessness or resignation. For instance, the opportunity was missed gives the impression that it was beyond the character's control, perhaps even making them seem like a passive participant in their own story. This can add emotional depth, making readers feel sympathy or frustration with the character's situation. Passive constructions like this reflect the character's perspective on events. In persuasive writing, passive voice can be used strategically to focus on the consequences rather than the cause. For example, the policy was implemented to reduce pollution sounds less accusatory than the government implemented the policy to reduce pollution. This keeps the tone neutral and emphasizes the reason for the action rather than who took the action. It's an effective technique when aiming to influence opinions or attitudes. In mystery novels, passive voice can be used to keep readers guessing. Sentences like "the letter was opened" carefully create suspense without revealing the identity of the person involved. By withholding certain details, writers can make the reader wonder who is responsible for certain actions. This creates tension and curiosity, which is key to the genre's success. The ambiguity of passive voice plays a role in keeping secrets from the audience. In legal language, passive voice helps maintain a formal, impersonal tone. For instance, the contract was signed by both parties avoid stating who signed it, keeping the focus on the contract itself. This can be crucial in creating documents that are neutral and focused on facts. Passive constructions in legal documents ensure that the content remains objective, reducing the risk of bias or personal interpretation in matters of law. In instructional writing, passive voice is used to clarify the steps involved in a process. For example, the document should be reviewed for errors eliminates any confusion about who should do the reviewing. It provides a clear, generalized instruction that anyone can follow. This approach ensures that tasks are seen as universal and not tied to a specific individual, making them easier to understand and execute. In business communication, passive voice helps to keep the focus on results rather than personal actions. For example, the presentation was delivered to the client's focuses on the outcome, not on the person delivering it. This form of communication is often used in meetings, emails, and reports to convey efficiency and professionalism. It provides a smooth and neutral way of presenting facts without drawing attention to any one contributor. In journalism, passive voice is used when the reporter wants to present facts without injecting personal opinions or biases. For example, the decision was made to change the policy keeps the focus on the action, rather than on who made the decision. This helps journalists maintain an objective, factual tone in their reporting. It prevents the writer from taking sides or adding personal commentary to the story. In medical writing, passive voice is commonly used to describe procedures or outcomes in a neutral way. For instance, the medication was administered by the nurse avoids unnecessary details about the person performing the action. This keeps the language clear and professional, allowing the focus to remain on the treatment rather than the healthcare provider. It's a standard convention in medical records and research reports. Passive voice can also be found in descriptions of accidents or unexpected events. For example, The car was damaged in the collision leaves out who caused the damage, focusing instead on the result. This form of narration keeps the incident impersonal and helps convey the facts without sounding accusatory. It creates a more neutral tone, which is useful when discussing sensitive or traumatic situations. In educational settings, passive voice is often used to describe the completion of tasks. For example, the homework was completed by the students emphasizes the outcome rather than focusing on who performed the action. This can be especially useful when addressing the class as a whole, as it maintains a neutral, collective tone. It helps avoid singling out individual students while still conveying that the task was done. In customer service, passive voice helps maintain politeness and avoid blame. For instance, the issue was resolved as quickly as possible sounds less confrontational than saying, "We resolved the issue quickly." This approach allows companies to reassure customers without getting too personal. It keeps communication focused on the positive outcome rather than on the actions of specific employees. In scientific writing, passive voice helps to emphasize the methods and findings rather than the researchers. For example, the experiment was conducted using specific parameters removes focus from the scientist and directs attention to the procedure. This is common in research papers and academic journals where the emphasis is on the study's process and results, not on the individuals conducting it. It contributes to the objectivity of the report. In advertising, passive voice is often used to describe the features or benefits of a product. For instance, "The product is designed to last for years" suggests quality without focusing on who designed it. This creates a sense of trust and reliability without overly promoting the creator. Passive voice can make the product feel more timeless, as though it stands for itself, independent of any specific individual or company. In cultural analysis or criticism, passive voice can be used to remove the focus from individuals and place it on the event or phenomenon being discussed. For example, "The tradition was passed down for generations" emphasizes the cultural practice itself, rather than any specific people involved in preserving it. This helps writers approach subjects in a more impersonal, analytical way, which is important when writing objectively about cultural practices or societal trends. In fiction, passive voice can be used to depict a character's sense of helplessness or fate. For example, "The decision was made without consulting him" implies that the character was left out of the decision-making process, building a sense of frustration or isolation. This subtle use of passive voice reflects the character's experience of being controlled by external forces, which can deepen the emotional complexity of the story. In weather reports, passive voice helps keep the focus on the weather itself. For example, "A storm was predicted for the weekend" doesn't specify who predicted it, keeping the statement general and objective. This style is commonly used in meteorological forecasts to present information clearly and without bias. It allows the listener to focus on the weather patterns, rather than on the person providing the forecast. In political discourse, passive voice is sometimes used to shift focus away from specific politicians or parties. For instance, "The law was passed to improve healthcare" avoids naming the lawmakers who passed it, focusing on the law itself. This can make statements sound more neutral and less partisan, which is useful when discussing legislation in a way that appeals to a wider audience. It ensures that the law is presented as a collective achievement. In creative nonfiction, passive voice can be used to evoke a reflective or nostalgic tone. For example, The town was visited by tourists each summer gives a sense of time passing without getting into who exactly visited. It provides a broader view of events, making them feel part of a larger pattern rather than individual actions. This helps the writer create a mood or atmosphere without delving too deeply into specific details. Finally, in day-to-day conversation, passive voice can be used to speak indirectly about something sensitive. For example, the decision was made to cancel the event can be a softer way to inform someone of a cancellation without directly saying that it was a personal choice. This form allows speakers to navigate tricky conversations with more diplomacy. It's an easy way to discuss uncomfortable topics while maintaining a calm and respectful tone. In journalism, passive voice can also help when writing about an event that is still developing. For example, the building was evacuated due to a fire alarm provides the essential information while leaving out the specifics of who made the evacuation call. This leaves room for more details to come later without prematurely concluding the situation. By using passive voice, journalists can maintain a neutral tone while providing updates as they unfold. In personal writing, passive voice can allow authors to describe experiences without directly involving themselves. For instance, the book was read by many people last year keeps the focus on the book and its reception rather than on the person reading it. This is useful when recounting personal events or sharing experiences in a way that emphasizes the action itself rather than the person performing it. It subtly shifts the focus away from the speaker to the broader context. In political speeches, leaders often use passive constructions to avoid directly pointing fingers or assigning blame. For example, mistakes were made allows the speaker to acknowledge a problem without implicating anyone in particular. This vague, indirect phrasing can deflect criticism and maintain the speaker's image while addressing issues in a general way. It is a tool used in rhetoric to soften the impact of negative statements, in formal presentations. Passive voice can be a good way to emphasize the importance of processes rather than individuals. For instance, the results were analyzed by the research team focuses on the process of analyzing results rather than on who did the analysis. This is useful when presenting findings to a large audience, where the goal is to convey information impartially and professionally. It also contributes to maintaining a more formal and objective tone. In the arts, passive voice is sometimes used to make the act of creation seem less personal, giving the art more significance. For example, the painting was created with bold strokes and vibrant colors shifts the focus away from the artist and places it on the artwork itself. This approach helps elevate the subject of the work, making it feel like a product of something larger than the individual. It allows the piece to stand on its own without being overly tied to the artist's identity. In travel writing, passive voice can make the experience feel more universal and less focused on the author. For example, the city was explored on foot provides a more general statement about the travel experience without focusing on the person doing the exploring. This allows the reader to imagine themselves as the traveler, placing less emphasis on the writer's actions and more on the destination or the journey. In speculative fiction, passive voice is used to create a sense of mystery or inevitability. For example, the truth was hidden for centuries creates an aura of secrecy, suggesting that something important has been concealed from the world. This technique can be especially effective in genres like fantasy or science fiction, where world building and history play important roles in the story. It helps the writer convey a sense of grand, untold events without needing to specify who was responsible, in personal reflections or memoirs. Passive voice can help shift focus away from the writer's actions and onto broader, more universal experiences. For example, the lesson was learned over many years emphasizes the process of learning rather than focusing on the individual who learned it. This makes the writing feel more reflective and allows the reader to connect with the experience on a more emotional level, rather than just focusing on the author's perspective. In formal communication, such as company memos or emails, passive voice is used to convey information without assigning blame or responsibility. For instance, the error was corrected promptly communicates the resolution without focusing on who made the error. This helps maintain a tone of professionalism and efficiency, which is important in a work environment. It prevents the conversation from becoming too personal or confrontational, focusing solely on the action taken. In self-help books, passive voice can be used to make advice sound more universally applicable. For example, positive habits are encouraged to be practiced daily. Presents the advice in a neutral, objective way. This approach allows readers to see the advice as part of a larger framework, rather than something being imposed by the author. It shifts the focus from the author's individual authority to the broader concept of positive growth and development. In sports reporting, passive voice can be used to describe events without focusing too much on the individuals involved. For example, the game was won in the final seconds highlights the outcome rather than the specific players or actions leading to the win. This allows the reporter to present the most important information succinctly without getting bogged down in individual performances. It's a way of summarizing the event in a clear and concise manner. In corporate branding, passive voice can be used to create a sense of collective effort behind a product or service. For example, the product is designed to enhance user experience sounds less about any one person or team and more about the end result. This helps companies present themselves as unified, with a focus on the customer's experience rather than the specifics of how the product was developed. It conveys a polished, professional message without drawing attention to individual contributors. In religious texts or spiritual writings, passive voice can be used to present concepts as divinely influenced or predestined. For instance, the teachings were passed down through generations removes any direct reference to human agency, making the teachings feel eternal and guided by a higher power. This allows the text to feel more universal and divine, transcending the limitations of individual authors or speakers. In product reviews, passive voice can be used to express general impressions of a product without focusing too much on the reviewer. For example, the product is highly recommended by users emphasizes the collective opinion rather than the reviewer's personal endorsement. This makes the review feel more objective and trustworthy, as it suggests a wider consensus rather than relying on a single individual's perspective. In literary criticism, passive voice is often used to discuss the work itself without focusing on the critic's personal viewpoint. For example, the themes were explored deeply throughout the novel shifts attention away from the critic's analysis and toward the text being analyzed. This helps maintain an objective tone, which is important when writing critically about a piece of literature. It also makes the writing seem more like a scholarly examination rather than a subjective opinion. In technology writing, passive voice is used to describe features or processes in a way that feels more standardized. For example, the app is updated regularly. Avoid specifying who updates it, making it sound like a feature of the app itself rather than the actions of an individual developer. This neutral phrasing can make technological features sound more reliable and automated, creating trust with users who expect consistent functionality. In film and television scripts, passive voice can be used to describe settings or actions without focusing on the characters involved. For example, the lights were dimmed provides a description without specifying who dimmed them, allowing the action to focus more on the atmosphere than the person performing it. This can be effective in setting the tone or mood of a scene without distracting from the overall visual experience. Now that you understand the difference between active and passive voice, as well as when and why to use each, you're ready to elevate your writing and speaking. Whether you want to sound more direct, formal, or even mysterious, the power to switch between these voices is in your hands. Practice using both in your everyday communication, and soon, you'll notice how much more effective your messages become. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with anyone who might need a grammar boost. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.